Hi, I'm Mary Kopczynski, the CEO of RegAlytics. Here's your update on this week's 22,003 regulatory alerts. And what a week, starting with Binance and rounding out with Coinbase. For the record, this was 100% predictable. So if you're remotely surprised, then you have to start watching this show every week. Believe me, it will end the surprises. Pass it along to your friends. Subscribe on YouTube. I'm telling you, it is totally foreseeable. So the topic of the week is obviously digital assets. The SEC is suing both Binance and Coinbase for securities violations. Binance is in trouble because they said they were only offering U.S. investors products within their U.S. company, but in fact they were doing all sorts of crazy stuff with privately held legal entities that owned other legal entities, so that essentially high-end U.S. customers could get illegal stuff through the unregulated entities. Then Coinbase, which is, in contrast, a publicly traded company registered with the SEC to offer its stock to the American public, is in trouble because they were operating as a broker and an exchange and a clearing agency all in one. Typically, each of these entity types need to be registered with the SEC and governed separately for investor protections. How it took this long for the SEC to realize that Coinbase has been openly doing this for a long time leads me to believe that this investigation has been going on a long time with lots of lobbying and negotiation and pleading and honestly probably arrogance on both sides. But get ready. As I said months ago, when Coinbase got fined $50 million by the New York Department of Financial Services, this is January, regulators smell blood in the water. So you can bet yourself that the state suits are just getting started, and both Binance and Coinbase are going to be mired in regulatory investigations in every corner of the globe. Also interesting was that this week the SEC settled charges with the Coinbase insider trading brothers. The first brother is sentenced to 24 months in prison and ordered to forfeit 10.97 Ether and 9,440 Tether. And the other brother was sentenced to 10 months in prison and ordered to forfeit 892,000. What else? Big news. The CFTC approves the CBOE Clear Digital to clear margined digital asset futures. See how they did that? The Chicago Board of Exchange, which has been around for over 50 years, created a brand new legal entity, registered it with the appropriate authorities, and then they started doing the business. It's really kind of unfair because only the deep pockets are really able to play the Wall Street games because of the expense of regulation. I think at a certain point, the regulators felt that Coinbase and Binance were now making really big money. It's time for them to afford playing the real game with the real rules. Speaking of real rules, the European Banking Authority is asking for comments on their proposal to extend current anti-money laundering and anti-terrorism financing rules to apply to all crypto asset service providers. Our regulator of the week is the California Department of Insurance, trying their absolute best to backpedal over the recent announcement by State Farm to stop insuring houses in California. Once again, totally foreseeable. For the past 3 years ago, it's been California policy to refuse to allow insurance carriers to cancel wildfire insurance policies, even in places that are clearly in danger every single summer of burning down. But then the Department of Insurance puts out a notice to California's constituents saying the decision is because of factors beyond their control, like climate change, reinsurance, and inflations. I personally think that is a bunch of hooey. Case in point, last week's announcement by the California Department of Insurance announcing $1.5 million in refunds to customers being overcharged for wildfire risk. Or perhaps the one in January where the Department of Insurance clearly restated California law that wildfire couldn't be excluded from insurance policies. I mean, for goodness sakes, California is on fire every single summer. What do you think's going to happen if you're going to make insurance companies pay for it? Speaking of risky business, on to our fine tracker. The SEC settled with the former head of Wells Fargo Community Bank for a $5 million penalty for her role in misleading investors about the success of the community bank. This is the woman behind the whole cross-selling metric, claiming that these cross-sells were great and made the company really strong, even though the services were unused, unneeded, and sometimes opened without customer authorization. Also risky, holding your money on PayPal, Venmo, or any other cash app. If this latest crypto crisis has taught us nothing, it's that the FDIC guarantees deposits in traditional registered banks. If you put your money in a not registered bank, or not a bank at all, and it goes bankrupt, sorry, Charlie, poof, the money is gone forever. So please don't be an idiot. Be sure to transfer any large balances on your Venmo or PayPal into your regular bank account as soon as they come. Also risky business, mortgage valuations. The Fed, FDIC, OCC, NCUA, CFPB, and the Federal Housing Finance Agency are looking for comments on quality control in relation to automated valuation models. Another crazy find this week? Some dude in eastern Washington is going to prison over ghost cows. What is a ghost cow? It's when you make $230 million from Tyson Foods by selling them 200,000 head of cattle that don't actually exist. The judge sentenced the defendant to 11 years in prisons and $244 million in fines, but he said that this was the case that was the biggest theft or fraud he's ever seen in his career and the biggest he ever hopes to see. Xbox was also busted for $20 million by the FTC for collecting personal information from kids under 13, not telling the parents, and then keeping the data for way too long. Also, Amazon busted for $25 million for Alexa for telling parents that they could delete recordings of their kids, but then it kept the kids' recordings indefinitely. And the most egregious of all, the Ring camera. They settled, now it was only $5.8 million, but Ring gave its employees and hundreds of Ukraine-based third-party contractors up close and personal video access into customers' bedrooms, their kids' bedrooms, and other really personal spaces, including the ability to download, view, and share those videos at will. Ew. That's it this week for RegAlytics, so join me every Wednesday for your dose of regulatory news.